Hello and welcome to another Talk Wildlife video. Today we are talking to somebody that could have been stuck in very easily in Brazil at this time. I'm not sure whether he's happy or unhappy about that. We'll ask him in a minute. I'm going to talk to Lee Dingain, who's from REGUA, and we're going to talk to him about his involvement with it and what it is. It's an exceptionally good project. As I've already mentioned, it's in Brazil, and without further ado, what I'll do is I'll ask Lee to just introduce himself.
Hi there, Alan. Yeah, my name, like you said, my name's Lee Dingain. I've been involved with REGUA for 14 years now. It's gone very quick, and it all came about when Rachel, my other half, and I decided to travel around South America for a year, and this was back in 2006. But we didn't just want to travel. We wanted to, get involved in conservation. And I've been interested in natural history all my life, so I really wanted to not just travel and see wildlife. Wanted to do something as well. And a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, Sam Woods, he put me in touch with this project in Brazil, which was very much in its infancy, called REGUA. And we contacted Nicholas Locke, who's the president of REGUA, and said, look, we'd like to come out and do some voluntary work maybe. And he said, oh great, there we are actually thinking about setting up a volunteer program. You could be our first volunteers. So we left the UK, went to South America, and we spent the first 3 months volunteering in Brazil at REGUA, and that's how we became involved. And both Rachel and I have been involved ever since. And we spent 3 months there at the time, and in that time, we started getting involved in the kind of tourism side of things. So they had a brand new rainforest lodge that was basically all locked up. No one knew who REGUA was, and we thought, well, we could help promote REGUA. So we started rebuilding website and writing lots of new website content and training up bird guides and that kind of thing. And in our time there, Rachel and I even marked out a lot of the trails that are now being used by bird watchers and actually a lot of the scientists there as well. And ever since we've been involved when we've come back, so we run the bird fair stand every year, and I manage the websites and the social media, and I've written lots of articles about REGUA as well, and produce all the kind of promotional leaflets, that kind of thing. So it's been 14 years where I've been involved, and I think I'm involved for life now.
I hope so, because you're clearly doing a great job. I mean, it sounds fantastic. It sounds really an amazing sort of feat.
Yeah, it's an amazing place.
Just to give people an idea of where REGUA is, before I go into some pictures, and we can talk over the pictures, whereabouts is it actually geographically? Where's it situated?
So REGUA is actually located in the Atlantic Forest, which is South America's second largest forest. And everyone's heard of the Amazon. A few people have heard of the Atlantic Forest relatively speaking. And the Atlantic Forest stretches all the way from northeast Brazil right the way down into northeast Argentina. And it's kind of a narrow band of rainforest that follows the Atlantic coast. And unlike the Amazon, it's very mountainous. So the mountains range right up to just over 2,000 meters. And REGUA is located in the Guapiçu Valley, which is about 80 kilometers northeast of Rio City. So the actual valley itself is in Rio de Janeiro state, and we're probably about an hour and a half drive from Rio City. So and the reserve lies on the coastal slope of the mountains, so it's rather than the inland slope. So it's the kind of humid forest side. Yeah.
I think what I'll do is I'll share screen. We'll go to some pictures and we'll talk over the pictures and give people a bit more of an understanding, especially the species list, because the number of species are just phenomenal. But we'll come on to that, and we'll give a bit more background to some of the projects that are happening right now, actually, which would be good. Right, so I'll just share screen. Just bear with me 1 second. Right, okay, so I think before we go any further, that looks unbelievable. What are we looking at there?
Okay, so this is first of all, I say that REGUA is actually a Brazilian charity, but it's also a large 9,000 hectare nature reserve as well. And the nature reserve is more or less it's more or less continuous Atlantic forest, and the reserve ranges in altitude from 35 meters right up to over 2,000 meters, which on the photo here is the peaks of those mountains. And that is the view that you would get from the lodge. We have a lodge that accepts international guests from all around the world. And that is basically the view from the garden at the lodge that overlooks the reserve. So
right, not too shabby then.
No, it's quite nice, yeah.
Yeah, so if you sort of mentioned sort of the forest area, so this is pretty much an example of some of the habitat that you find in the area.
Yeah, so the reserve is located on the coastal slope, as I said, of the mountain range.
Yeah,
and most of that forest is evergreen humid forest, and which is what's shown in the photo there. So it's kind of what most people think of when they think of rainforest, you know. So there's, you know, epiphytes growing everywhere, and there's lianas and vines and all that sort of thing. But there are lots of other pockets of habitat within the Atlantic forest as well. So there's things like swamps, and there's a forest habitat called Ristinga, which is found on the coast, and there's also wetlands and there's grasslands, that kind of thing. And so REGUA also includes not only the lowland forest, which is what you can see here, and, you know, several fairly large rivers as well, of which the Guapiaçu River is the main one, which is what the reserve and the NGO is named after. But also wetlands, includes wetlands as well, includes some Tapir swamp, also includes some areas of wet pasture as well. And so there's a variety of habitats, but most of it is lowland rainforest.
Yeah. By the way, a lot of these photographs that we're going to show, some are done by other people, and thank you very much to them.
Yeah.
A lot of them are done by yourself, and I have to say there's some amazing ones. That one in particular is just great. So yeah, thank you for sending them through to me.
This is the waterfall on the one of our best birdwatching trails, called the Waterfall Trail, funnily enough. And this is kind of at the end of the trail. And the interesting thing about the photo is it's very difficult to get a sense of scale with photos of this waterfall, because the waterfall looks quite small in photos, most people find, but actually it's really quite big. That's probably approaching sort of 80-90 meters, that waterfall. So it's quite big, but it looks really small.
Yeah.
It's just one of those things that's worth pointing out, though.
I didn't see it as that big at all, but now
it's really, we've got some photos of people swimming at the base of the waterfall, and you get a real sense of scale then. Wow,
that is amazing. Now, speaking of scale, let's just talk about a few of the sort of the wildlife species you find there. So I don't normally have to quote numbers, but I have to quote numbers here. I mean, come on, 485 species of birds at REGUA, 62 of which are endemics, and here is just a few of them. So tell us a bit about sort of the bird life there. And I know that one of the, I'll dwell on that slide ever so slightly while people just take in that sort of feast. And then I'll move to this next one. I know this is one of the specials there. Talk to us about bird watching at REGUA.
Yeah, so bird watching is when we first got involved with REGUA, the bird watching wasn't very well known. It wasn't a very well known bird watching destination at all. So, but actually there are some quite special birds at REGUA, which there aren't any species that are not found anywhere else, but there are some species which are without a doubt easier to see at REGUA than anywhere else in South America. And this bird in this slide, the shrike-like tinker, is definitely one of them. So a friend of mine who lives in South America, has lived in South America for 15 years, still hasn't seen this bird. So, but at REGUA, it's actually relatively straightforward to see, and it's quite high on the target list of target species for a lot of visiting bird watchers, without a doubt. So, and this is, sorry,
carry on.
And this is a bird that, because of the reforestation efforts as well, is actually probably easier to see now than when I first visited the reserve. So it's definitely come down in altitude, so it's close to the lodge now because of the reforestation. So it's getting easier to see, if anything.
It's a really amazing bird. I want to go back to the slide before it, just in case people didn't get enough of those birds, but also want to talk about the snipe picture that you've got there, because people that know me know I'm a wader fan. Cracking picture. So are they sort of regular around the reserve, or?
Yeah, they're actually the giant snipe is an interesting species. When I first went to Brazil, it was one of those birds that few people had actually seen well on the ground. You know, most people were seeing it in flight because it's nocturnal, and it's also, even despite being nocturnal, it's not only is that making it harder to see, but it's one of those species that was a little bit mythical at the time. And one of REGUA's guides, Adjale, who a lot of bird watchers who've been to REGUA will have met, he went out and just decided to try and find this at night using a spotlight, and not only found them, but managed to get just incredible views. He's got a lot of very good field skills, and he can get visiting groups of bird watchers just within a few meters of these birds on the ground, and they don't flush. So they're really, it's incredible. They've become quite easy to see throughout the year now. And usually people get pretty good views. You know, sometimes you might see them fly off, or you might see them just flying over in display, but more often than not, you'll see them on the ground, just like the photo there. And that photo was actually taken just by torchlight. There was no flash involved. It was so close. It was probably about 2 or 3 meters away. It really was incredible. So, and it's become one of the birds that people really want to see now when they come to REGUA.
Yeah, too right, and so it should be. I know. I mean, if you look at the pictures around it, you've got like fantastic colours and very nice birds. But just look closely at that snipe. Just look at those feathers. Sort of, you can't beat a wader. I'm sorry.
And it's huge as well. It's about 10% larger than the Eurasian woodcock. So it's a big bird. And when you do see them in flight, they actually seem to appear larger than on the ground. I mean, they appear almost appears like a tawny owl's flying past you or something. Yeah, they're that big, and they're really quite vocal as well. So you quite often see them calling on the ground, and that makes them quite charismatic to watch. You know, as a lot of these waders are. So it's a really special bird for sure.
Yeah, I might have to add that one to my bucket list. So we'll remind people about the fact that there's 485 species of birds, 62 of which are endemic, and then we'll skip to mammals. So you've got 73 species of mammals. Yep. Now we'll talk about a special one that was part of the reintroduction a bit later, but just give us a feel while we're being eyeballed by this chat about the types of mammals that you get there.
Yeah, so REGUA does have, like you say, 73 species of mammals, of which 53 are actually bats. So it's got amazing diversity of bats, and but there are some key mammals which, because of the size of the forested area in the Guapiaçu Valley, that we're still fortunate to have, and the southern woolly spider monkey, or the southern miraquí, which is a Brazilian name for it, is probably our flagship mammal. It's the rarest primate in South America, and there's very few populations left, and we've got a very small population. We're not quite sure how many, probably 15, 20, 25 animals, something like that, and they are actually still very difficult to see. I've never seen one, and in actual fact, many of the guides have only seen them a few times, but recently we've had some researchers visit the reserve, and they've managed to follow them and put camera traps out. And this unbelievably was a camera trap image. So wow. It's just managed to capture some really good behavior, and we've found a good idea now of where the animals are hanging out. But other than woolly spider monkey, we've also got things like puma. We've got a good population of puma on the reserve, and ocelot, and some other cats as well. And we've got neotropical otter. We've got a really good population of brown-throated sloth. So it's one of those animals you're virtually guaranteed to see when you come to REGUA, but also lots of animals that have appeared as a result of the restoration work that we're doing, the habitat restoration as well. So things like capybara, which are associated with wetlands, the world's largest rodent. We've now got a big population of those at the wetland as well. Whereas when I first went to REGUA, there were none to be seen. So yeah, a good population of mammals. Some of the flagship ones like the spider monkey and the puma are exceptionally difficult to see because of the history of hunting in the Atlantic forest. Mammals are extremely shy, but we're fortunate enough to have a good population of some of them anyway.
So yeah, on both slides there you mentioned sort of repopulation from various species, which must be sort of incredibly satisfying for the likes of yourself and your colleagues, that you can use the words like repopulating due to how you've managed them areas. They must all be extremely proud.
Yeah, I mean it's working at REGUA is one of those very positive life experiences. It's we live in a world where habitat decline and species decline is just headline news, and it just seems to be the story, from one place to another place, and in much of South America it's also the same. But at REGUA, it's one of those places where we are actually seeing a reverse of that. We're seeing habitats coming back quite quickly too, and also species returning to those habitats very quickly. We've had bird species which are associated with higher altitudes that have been appearing in reforested areas at REGUA at really low altitude. So birds like blue-bellied parrots and giant ant shrike and hooded berry eater. These are species that are associated with higher altitudes, but they've been found around the wetland, which is only 35 meters above sea level. And we think that's probably not so much because they're altitudinal, they're dependent on certain altitudes. It's probably just because much of the forest has been cleared from low altitude. So it's a really positive place, and we go back year after year, and you just see the changes every time you go back. It's a really good experience.
Yeah, and we'll talk a little bit about the work that's going on in a short while. Now, if you bear in mind, so let's go 73 species of mammal, moths. Now, no number of has been put against how many moths, but the reason I wanted to and I'll do it again, 73 species of mammal, 76 species just of hawk moth. That's outstanding. That's amazing.
It's incredible diversity. I mean, it's the hawk moths are one of the easier groups to study, and actually REGUA's we've produced 4 field guides now, because there just are not field guides available for many of these groups in southeast Brazil. And the first one that we produced was for hawk moths, and we were fortunate. A friend and colleague of mine, Allan Martin, and George Bizzaro, who's REGUA's research coordinator, they teamed together with Alexander Suarez from the National Museum in Rio and produced a field guide. And I've actually got the field guide.
Right. Well, obviously, what we'll do when we come back, keep it handy, because at the moment it'll be too small to see on screen. But when we come back, certainly show it.
Yeah. Okay.
It's one I wouldn't mind getting my hands on as well. I know that the one on the left here isn't a hawk moth, is it? Is that one of the silk moths? That's
a silk moth, yeah. So the silk moths are there's quite a variety of silk moths at REGUA, and again, because of silk moths are held in collections, there are resources that have enabled us to identify many of them. So because they're bred, they're often held in collections throughout the world. So. But there are many other species of moth at REGUA, and we've probably identified, outside of hawk moths, probably only another 60 species for certain. We photographed probably somewhere 700 or 800, 900 species, if not more than that we just can't put a name to yet. So, and what we've done is actually we've built the world's first moth wall at the lodge, and what this is it's actually a concrete structure with a roof with mercury vapor lamps on it, and what we do is we put it on quite often and in the morning you can just go along and it'll be covered in moths on a good night, and that's how we've managed to photograph and start putting together a bio-inventory of these moth species. Something that guests can even get involved with as well, because the moth ball is actually at the lodge. So it's one of those things that people submit photographs, and slowly we're building up a sort of online image an image database of the moths that are found there. But they're just very hard to identify, most of them.
Yeah, that's incredible. So before we move on, the silk moth, do you know what species that is?
I can't pronounce the Latin name, actually.
All right, no worries.
It's on a list, but I would have to look online to get the list.
Don't worry. I just thought that this is going to have some sort of bizarre. It almost looks like some little rodent peering through a leaf. But anyway, fantastic picture.
I don't think it has an English name. I was looking the other day, and I don't think it has an English name. Surprising, because it's one of the more common ones. Right.
Okay. Well, there you go. Maybe we should name it. Right. So 76 species of just hawk moth. We've heard about how many of the other moths. 73 species of amphibian. Presumably, the bulk of them are going to be frogs. Is that right?
Yeah. So yeah, frogs. There's quite a few toads as well. But we've been fortunate to have several groups of researchers visit over the years and actually produce scientific papers and also species lists for the frogs. So we've got a pretty good idea of which species are present, especially around the wetlands, but also in in much of the forest as well. But obviously, many frogs are found very high up in the trees. So there's going to be no doubt many more species that to be found at the reserve yet.
Yeah, that's it. I've thought of a name for the moth. If you look at that frog in the middle, and then go back, we could call that the frog-faced moth. Let's or not.
There are quite a few. There's quite a few of the silk moths that have those eye-like patterns on the hind wings, and as far as I know, they're used for a defense mechanism. So if you disturb one, it falls to the ground and opens its wings up, displaying the eyes. So that seems to be a defense mechanism for that particular group. So. Yeah. That's
you probably noticed I've slightly moved on to another Lepidoptera, and that is this incredible butterfly that is actually so far undescribed.
Yeah, we've had quite a lot of research going on over the last few years with butterflies, and REGUA is about to produce its fourth book, which is the butterflies of the Serra dos Orgulhos Mountains, which is the mountains we're located in. And as a result of that research, we've actually found 4 new species to science. Wow. And this particular one is a satirid that I photographed in 2016, and I couldn't put a name to it. And it was last year that I got approached by George, who's our research coordinator, saying that he's been trying to put a name to it, and he's been in touch with colleagues and who have been working on this group of butterflies, and they can confirm it's actually new to science. So at the time, it was the only photographs that existed. I think I had taken some photos, Rachel had taken some, and one of my friends, Sue, was there as well, and she got some photos. And we were just astounded. We didn't realise at the time that just because we couldn't identify it, it'd be new.
Yeah, and people sort of hear about these things and they read about these things that, there's so many species yet to be discovered and all of this, but they don't, until sort of you see something like this, you don't realise that actually we're not just talking here about sort of insects that might be living in the undergrowth that are very hard to find. This is a butterfly on full show that is new to science, so there's a lot that's still to be discovered.
Yeah, an awful lot. Yeah, there's I think the part of the reason is that there's just not that many people looking, and it's not because people don't want to look. It's these habitats are quite difficult to work in. There's high humidity, and a lot of the flora and fauna is very difficult to find, and it's so they're difficult things to discover much of the time. So. But yeah, we found a few other species to science as well. So it's certainly possible. People think that I couldn't possibly find anything new, but it's probably easier than you think.
Yeah, well, I've got this one to talk about as well, which has got quite a special name, I believe.
Yeah, so this is a damselfly that one of our regular visitors, a chap called Tom Compier, who's been studying the dragonflies and damselflies at REGUA for several years. He found this damselfly in quite a small fragment of Atlantic forest at REGUA, and didn't recognise it, and it turned out to be completely new to science, and he's named it the REGUA pincer tip in honour of the conservation work that we're doing at REGUA. So that's just a really nice gesture. And he found it quite early on in his study. I think it was just a couple of years after he'd got going that he discovered it. So it just goes to show, you know, that if you take an in-depth look at things, that you've got a really good chance of finding something new. And
that is a lovely species. That is,
it's really lovely looking damselfly. Yeah,
it is very cool. Right, so let's talk about, because the one thing that struck me, you know, is obviously you hear about sort of deforestation and you know, all of the destruction that goes with that. So if you could just give us a little bit of background to sort of some of the threats both within and around the area, but also this one struck me, so I'd like to sort of talk a little bit about this one as well, which is the bird trade, because you said, again, you hear it but not very often. So if you could start off just giving us an idea of some of the threats, and then we'll talk about this one.
Yeah, sure. Well, the Atlantic forest I think it was actually the first large rainforest that began to be felled. So when the first Europeans arrived in Brazil in, I think it was the 1500s, they immediately started felling the forest, and actually it's now one of the most threatened biomes in the world. So I think it's second after Madagascar. There's only somewhere around about 10% of the original forest area remaining. So it's a really scarce habitat now. And so obviously deforestation traditionally has been the biggest threat the Atlantic forest has had to deal with. And nowadays the Atlantic forest is protected on paper. So it's illegal to fell the forest. But the biggest threat still comes from deforestation, but as a result of urbanization. So what we're finding is that as the roads improve and people are moving out into the countryside, because a lot of people want weekend homes or holiday homes, that they may work in Rio, but they just want to get away into the countryside for the weekend. And REGUA now is with easy reach of cities like Rio. So the local villages, some of the urbanization has been really quite rapid over the last 10, 15 years. And a lot of that urbanization also results in small scale deforestation as well. So, and that continues to be a threat. So it's something we're really wary of, and it's why we're quite keen to buy areas of land to protect against people coming in and felling those areas.
Sure. But
also one of the other threats relates to tradition is illegal hunting. So, and the pictures here, this is a photo I took in a town very close to REGUA called Cachoeiras. And if you go there, a lot of the supermarkets and the general stores and even stationery stores will just have cages outside with Atlantic forest birds and singing their hearts out. And this one is green-winged siltator, which is one of the prized songsters, if you like. And because there's still a demand for these birds, then illegal hunting is still a problem in Atlantic forest. And we're fortunate in that we've been able to employ 10 rangers to protect the forest at REGUA. And so we've managed to reduce hunting quite significantly. It's probably down to about 98%. We've really managed to contain it, partly because we've been working really closely with the local communities, and they can see what we're trying to do, and they respect REGUA, and so they refrain from hunting in the forest. And also we're employing ex-hunters as well as rangers and also bird guides. Our principal bird guide, Adjale, is an ex-hunter. Right. And so we've been able to reduce hunting, but cage birds are still a big problem. The cage bird trade is still a big problem in Brazil as a whole, but also in the Atlantic forest. So you can drive into small towns and you'll see black-fronted sultators or even bare-throated bellbirds in cages, singing away. It's it's sad to see, but it is declining. It seems to be a declining interest, and unfortunately, it seems to be that the younger population have less interest in having cage birds. So it's one of those things that may disappear in time, but we've been fortunate being able to reduce the amount of hunting at REGUA, and we've also been able to accept birds that from the authorities that have been seized. So because REGUA now is quite well known as a nature reserve, we've had authorities actually turn up at the reserve with confiscated cages full of all different species of Atlantic forest birds, and we've been able to release them onto the reserve. So we don't know if they're going to stay there, but at least they're being released in a place which is not necessarily going to mean they're going to be retrapped anytime soon. So
yeah, sure,
that's a really positive thing.
And you mentioned demand. So what is the attraction? What is the demand? Is it just to have a bird sitting in your house singing?
Yeah, we've a lot of hunting, and it's also the case not just with the cage bird trade. It's a lot of hunting is not about necessarily food or about controlling a species or anything like that. People are fascinated with nature. So local people have even taken to hunting as a way of even having a look at a species up close. Yeah. And I remember Adjale, REGUA's bird guide, telling me a story where he knew of someone who shot a Canopy toucan just because he wanted to have a look at it up close, because people don't have access to binoculars or telescopes, and they can see these things miles off, and they find them beautiful and fascinating, and they just want to have a good look at them. Yeah. So, but also the demand does come internationally as well. So there are species such as saffron finch, which is quite a common species, and it's not a particularly it's quite an attractive bird. It's bright yellow, but it's not a particularly good songster. But what it is highly territorial. So in some parts of the US, for example, these birds are actually put in cages, and they are coerced to fight together to the death, unfortunately. So there's an international trade as well in Brazil, which is quite difficult to fight. But Brazil are quite strict on their on trading species. So much of this trade is illegal. Brazil doesn't allow for these birds to be traded. It's all done on the black market. Yeah,
that's horrendous. So I think what we need to do, because that might have taken the mood down a bit, is talk about this project, because this has been highly successful, and it shows that things can be turned around. So again, if you give us a little bit of background to the tapir.
Yeah, this is amazing. So tapirs, this species of tapir is called Brazilian tapir or lowland tapir, and I've seen them in the Pantanal several times. They're quite easy to see in the larger, sort of more remote wetlands and forests of South America. But in Rio State, they've been extinct for 100 years. So they were hunted to extinction. And this project is run by Refauna project in Brazil, and they want to establish a viable population of lowland tapir in Rio State. And because of the amount of forest that's still in existence in the Guapiçu Valley, and because of the reduction of hunting that REGUA has been able to achieve, and the recreation of the wetlands as well that we've been able to achieve, REGUA was an ideal location to reintroduce the tapir. So they started in 2013, and we've now introduced 9 adults, and the plan is to introduce 50 over a period of 10 years. So that's what the plan is, and so far they're doing very well. So we've had many people come to see them, and they're actually exceptionally easy. Some of them are quite easy to see. You can see them on just walking around the trails.
Yeah, too right. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's just amazing to have them on the reserve.
And before I move on to the next picture, which will just sort of solidify what you've been saying, it's worth pointing out that not every lowland tapir wears an attractive collar and earrings. So can you just give, for those that may not have sort of been in contact with this kind of project before, if you just give us a quick idea of what they're for.
So the collars are GPS trackers. So what we need to do is work out where these animals are going, because when we release them, we have no idea whether they are going to go into the forest, whether they're going to go into agricultural fields which surround the reserve. So obviously there's a potential conflict there, between local farmers and the reserve, and we just don't know. We have no way of knowing where these animals are going. So the animals, when they're released, are fitted with a GPS tracker, and that GPS tracker is kept on for 12 months. And in that 12 months, we get a pretty good idea of which where these animals are going, and if there's kind of any damage that's going to be done to crops or anything like that. And so far, it seems that the animals have stayed, relatively close to forests. So there's been a couple that have been in fields, but they don't seem to be doing any, damage. But we want to make sure that they're going to, we need to know where they're wandering so that we can keep an eye on them, really. That's the idea behind it. But the trackers, they're only on for 12 months.
Right. Okay, which brings us to this amazing picture. Now, this is from a camera trap. The actual footage was dated March 2020. So this year, clearly, the youngster there is a little bit older than that, so it may be sort of, a couple of months old. But this is real success, isn't it? I mean,
yeah.
Because I'll let you tell the story. That the fact that this is an extinct species that in that area has been extinct for 100 years, and now we have this. So if you give us a little bit of background to that.
Yeah, this is amazing. So with obviously with any reintroduction project, you don't know if those animals are going to be going to breed. They're going to be comfortable enough to breed. They're going to feel safe enough or have enough food or that kind of thing. So we were quite we were expecting the animals to breed, but what we found was this animal, or this mother, actually gave birth on a farm just right outside the entrance to REGUA, so very close by, and seems to be doing really, really well. So we managed to get some camera trap footage, and the animal's being monitored and seems to be doing really, really well. But it's just such great news, just because within a few years we've had the first calf born in the wild in Rio State in 100 years. It's amazing.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Really,
and I know, I mean, I've just put a still up here, but I know that there's a very, very small amount of footage on the REGUA website, which I'll put a link to, which just basically shows them emerging from the bush. So the camera trapping was right in the right spot, but it's worth people having a look at that.
Yeah, it's really good because there's some footage that's in the day as well. And the footage is quite brief, but it just gives you an idea that the animal's moving around and seems very, very healthy.
Yeah.
We didn't want to, obviously we don't want to disturb them too much. So we haven't gone in and put in, lots of traps everywhere. So the footage is kind of, the footage that's online is a little bit repetitive. It's in the same sort of area that it's been taken, but it's just really nice to see.
Oh, absolutely, yeah. Yeah, and I'll definitely link to that.
Excellent.
So really, it brings us around to sort of how all that came about, how we've ended up with sort of 485 species of bird and 73 amphibians and all the rest of it, and repopulation. There's a sequence of pictures here. There's these two from the 1980s and 2005, and then I'll show another picture of what that area looks like now, or actually you can tell us how it's actually moved on from the next picture, because I think we've talked about sort of how you're generating this, but this is actually visible evidence. This is showing what's happened. So you talk us through the wetland one, and we'll talk through the reforestation in a short while.
Yeah, so the wetland is actually located in the low altitude part of the reserve, and it really forms the core of the reserve now. So it's where the lodge is situated, and the conservation centre, and the volunteer and search accommodation, that kind of thing. And back in 2004, the area looked very similar to the photo that's shown there from the 1980s. It was largely rough pasture. Most of the low hills were deforested, and there were a few tiny brooks running through that area. but no significant areas of water. But prior to the 1980s, it was actually the location of a swamp, and the swamp is made up of types of trees called tababuya, and it's a very, very endangered habitat now. So a lot of the lowlands used to be in the Atlantic Forest used to be covered in this tababuya swamp, and just prior to the 1980s, that was the case at this place at REGUA as well. So, but then the swamp was drained, the trees were felled, and in its place there was agriculture. So there was some manioc and cassava being grown, and also a lot of pasture as well. And when I arrived at REGUA in 2006, it looked pretty much the same as the photo on the right there. And what it was is the Nicholas and Raquel at REGUA decided that they wanted to restore, or partly restore if they could, some of this tababuya wetland, but also create some other habitat as well. So some open lakes and some reed beds and that kind of thing. And they had just started the year before Rachel and I first went to REGUA, and the area was still largely dominated by pasture and by agriculture, but there had been a small area of lakes created as well, and there was a hide that had been put up, so you could actually see some good birds from the hide as well. But there had been very little reforestation. It was mainly creating the wetlands, so it was still very open. And when we were there in 2006, we started planting some more trees around the area, and a few years later, Nicholas and Raquel added another large area of lake to the wetland as well, which is the area that's shown in the photo labelled for 2011. And you can see in this photo that actually there's been a lot more reforestation around those lakes as well. And now the hillside from where these photos were taken, it's actually very difficult to get a photo looking over that area now, because that hill has also been reforested. So it's actually very difficult for us to get later photos showing what the wetland looks like now. But it's actually a series of lakes and rivers with areas of reed bed, but also some tababuya swamp as well. We've actually managed to plant some tababuya, and it's taken. So we're really pleased about that. So it's the area is a little bit different from what it used to be, in the past, which is mainly swamp, and it's now much more of a mosaic of different habitat types. And there's been well over 200 species of bird now recorded just at the wetland. It's absolutely phenomenal. So
that's great.
Bird watching.
Yeah, I just want to sort of remind people again. So 1980s to 2011. So that's 10 years ago. So you can imagine what it looks like now. So that's amazing, and of course it was all down to this type of thing, which is reforestation. We're all used to hearing deforestation, so hearing reforestation is actually, it's a bit of a godsend. So talk us through how this happens. And I know before we sort of start recording, we were talking about sort of how you work with the locals, and I think that's absolutely key. So if you can touch on that as well, that would be great.
Yeah, so reforestation is one of the key objectives of REGUA. What we're trying to do is not just protect the existing fragments of forest in the Guapiaçu Valley, but also we're trying to buy areas of land that also include deforested areas too. And by reforesting those areas of land, you can then reconnect these forest fragments, which creates a much, much more healthy ecosystem. Plus, expands the area of forest that's protected. And so the way we reforest is we collect the seeds from over 150 species of Atlantic forest trees, most of which are pioneer species, but some are also successional species as well. And we plant these, we actually take the seeds and we germinate them in our own nursery, which is located right at the entrance of REGUA. And the nursery staff are all locals, so they know the forest really well. So we employ locals as rangers, and the rangers collect the seeds from the forest, bring them back to the nursery. And then we've got Mauricio, who's in charge of the nursery, and he lives in the local community. And he then germinates the seeds. Once they reach a certain size, he replants them into little seed packets that are then ready to take out into the field for replanting when they reach a certain size. So, and what we try to do is time the reforestation for the wet season at REGUA. So we plant them from around about December through to about March, which is the wet season, and that helps us keep them irrigated and watered because it's a very hot environment. And we've got quite a high success rate of reforestation. It's over 80%, so of the saplings survive. So, but it takes a lot of work. We also have to employ local people to manage things like ants, which will kill off very young saplings as well, to keep an eye on that kind of thing. And just the watering alone is a real, it's quite a labour-intensive activity, and it's something that a lot of people get involved with at REGUA. So REGUA is now the second largest employer in the Guapiçu Valley. So we employ around 35 staff. And in the tree planting season, we employ even more people because we need more people to plant the trees. So it's another way another way really that the locals really benefit from the reforestation work. It's something that without local support we just couldn't achieve.
And of course all of this needs funding, and that brings me on to my future holiday. So you have a lodge there. You sort of touched on it earlier, and clearly it will attract sort of people like bird watchers, like anybody interested in nature. Like certainly, if you're a moth type like I am, it's got to be on your bucket list. But you can stay there and you can get involved. So tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so the lodge is located right in the middle of the reserve. It's got 10 rooms and sleeps up to 18 people. So it's quite a small lodge. It's not one of these, really large sort of hotels or anything like that. It's got quite a nice villa-like atmosphere, and it's great for anyone who's interested in wildlife. So so many species of birds are available just on the trails, which are all marked from the lodge. So you can walk out on your own if you like, or you can hire one of REGUA's guides if you want to be guided. But if you're interested, like you say, in insects or orchids, or we've had people interested in reptiles, amphibians from all over the world come to stay. And it's an ideal base for any kind of natural history. Plus, it's a really good place to actually learn about the conservation as well. So Nicholas and Raquel often come up to the lodge and give presentations about REGUA and what we've been doing over the last year or so, and what we hope to do in the future, and show some really good before and after photos of how patches of areas looked before we restored them. So like you showed earlier, how the wetland area looks when you're at the lodge. It's hard to imagine that just 15 years ago that was just pasture and agriculture with barely a tree in sight. And people are amazed when they see those photos. But it's also from the lodge, it's easy to go down and look at the nursery and the conservation centre to see the researchers. We have local researchers that come from, say, the universities in Rio and further afield, studying all kinds of things from spiders, reptiles, amphibians, and quite often they will come back and they will have say fish from the wetland in tanks that you can look at that they're studying. It's just an amazing atmosphere to actually see the research and the conservation that's going on. So yeah, I highly recommend going, which is why I've been going for every year pretty much since 2006.
Excellent. And just to end the pictures, a reminder that at the beginning you mentioned that is the view from the lodge. Earlier you're telling me that the trees had grown so high now that you've actually had to build a platform which is a few seconds walk from the lodge that you can climb up to still see that view, which is immense.
Yeah, it's amazing. So when I first arrived at REGUA, this was the view from the veranda, but now the reforestation's been so successful, much of that view is hidden from the garden itself. So what we've done is we've built a canopy tower just on the edge of the lodge, and that is actually the view from the tower looking right over the reserve. So the reserve goes right up to 2,000 meters, which is the peaks in the distance that you can see there. And also quite hidden in that photo, you've got the wetland as well, so you can see things like egrets coming into roost in the evening and that kind of thing from the tower. But the tower is also great for birding. I mean, because you're high up and you're at canopy level, you get great views of tanagers and banana quits and trogons and all kinds of rainforest birds that are quite difficult to see without craning your neck. So it's a really nice place to spend a morning or an evening, just watching the birds come through, and also with a great view as well. It's brilliant.
Yeah, it looks it. So what I'll do is I think I'll come back to you now, and we'll just finish off, because clearly we've touched there on the funding element of it, and I just want to talk to you a bit more about the funding. Obviously, you rely on visitors to create some of your funds, but then you also have big projects that you actually go out and actively look for funding from organisations, from NGOs. Do you want to give us a little bit of background to that, and maybe some of the partners that you've worked with?
Yeah, sure. So the funding is it comes from a huge variety of individuals, conservation organisations, but also some corporate sponsorships as well. So it's a massive variety of sources, and much of the cost of the reserve itself, so running the reserve, paying for staff salaries, that kind of thing, is covered purely or more or less entirely by visitation to the lodge. So the lodge is completely not profit. All of the money that you spend at the lodge goes straight back into funding REGUA. But then the large projects, so things like land purchase and reforestation, the large scale reforestation, would simply be impossible without large donations. So some of our key supporters are the World Land Trust and Rainforest Trust, and sort of the Brazilian Atlantic Rainforest Trust as well. And without continued support and donations and funding from our supporters, we would not be able to protect anywhere near the amount of forest that we do. So it's something we're immensely grateful for, and without support from individuals right up to large conservation organisations, REGUA would not be able to do what we do. So it's something that we're always grateful for receiving. And it's good because the reforestation, for example, is so visible. People can to donate to plant trees, and within a year you can actually see those trees have grown. It's a really tangible result, which is great to see, because what we want to try to do is, if people make donations, we want to try and show the results. We want to try and show this area was a bare hillside a year ago, but now it's got trees that are 6 foot high, and a year later they might be 12 foot high. And it's something that we try to do through social media and the website, and try to keep people up to date with how these restoration work is going, because without people making these donations, we would not be able to do the work.
Excellent, and it's excellent work. And
thank you.
What I think I'll do is I'll close by really just saying two things. First of all, when I spoke to Heather about rock pools a couple of weeks ago, I talked to her about I'd much rather been doing this in the field, and I'd love to have come and done it in the field, and maybe in the future I'll come and do it in the field. I'd much rather have been doing this in the field, and hopefully in the future maybe I will do it from the field. I have to say that it looks like a stunning place, and that's the one thing I want to say. The other thing I want to say is basically just a big thank you, and not only to you for sort of giving us this interview, but to the owners who you mentioned, to the people that they're working with, to the locals that are out there and the volunteers that are helping. This is absolutely critical work. You can see by the number of species and by how they're repopulating that it's working. It's incredible, and they deserve such a massive thank you from the anybody that's into conservation, from that community and beyond. They deserve a massive thanks. So if you could pass on, they might even see the video, but if you pass on my thanks, if you pass on the thanks of anybody and everybody that's sort of into conservation, and anybody and everyone that's actually living on the planet, because without projects like yours, we would be in a lot worse state than we are. Not saying we're in a good state, but we'd be in a lot worse state than we are. So thank you very much to you and all your colleagues.
Thank you, Allan. And yeah, I'll definitely pass on your thanks and appreciation. And I'd like to say thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you and everybody else about REGUA. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Good. Well, and thanks again for your time, and I'll hopefully speak to you again.
Yes, love that. Be good. Thank you.
Take care, Lee. Thanks.
Thanks a lot.
Bye now.